Good evening, I'm Judge Linda Harris, and tonight we examine a case that has divided the Portland community and challenged our most basic assumptions about guilt and innocence. Two elderly brothers, brutally murdered in their own home. A caretaker who discovered their bodies was arrested, spent 2.5 months in jail, and then was released when charges were dropped. Emma Collins maintains her innocence, but many in Portland still believe she got away with murder. Was justice served, or is a killer still free? This case will test everything you think you know about reasonable doubt, circumstantial evidence, and the burden of proof. Sometimes the most obvious suspect isn't the guilty party. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we want to believe.
People ask why two old bachelors like us need a caretaker, but the truth is, we're not as young as we used to be. Michael's arthritis makes it hard for him to get around, and my memory isn't what it once was. Emma has been a godsend. She helps with the shopping, makes sure we take our medications, and keeps the house tidy. More than that, she's become like family to us. We never had children of our own, so having Emma around makes the house feel alive again. She has keys, knows all our routines, even has power of attorney for medical decisions. We trust her completely. At our age, you don't have time for people you can't trust. Emma is one of the good ones.
I've been a home health aide for 12 years, and I've never had a complaint against me. The Sanders brothers were special. They reminded me of my own grandfathers. Henry would tell me stories about his teaching days, and Michael would show me his woodworking projects. I worked multiple jobs to support my two teenagers, but I always made time for Henry and Michael. They needed someone they could depend on, and I was proud to be that person. The night they died, I was sleeping in the guest room like I always did when I had overnight duties. I'm a heavy sleeper. I even took a sleep aid because I'd been stressed about my other job. I never heard anything unusual. When I found them the next morning, I called 911 immediately. I would never hurt them. They were like family to me.
The Sanders brothers lived in a modest, single-story home in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood. It was a quiet street where neighbors knew each other and children played safely in their front yards. The house had been in the Sanders family for over 40 years, and the brothers had inherited it from their parents. On the evening of October 7th, 2020, everything appeared normal. Emma had prepared dinner for the brothers, helped them with their evening medications, and settled them into bed around 9 p.m. She then retired to the guest room, where she slept whenever her caregiving duties required an overnight stay. According to Emma, she slept soundly through the night and heard nothing unusual. But by morning, both brothers would be dead, and Emma would be the prime suspect in their brutal murders.
When I arrived at the Sanders house, several things immediately struck me as unusual. The brothers' bedroom doors were locked from the inside, which Emma said never happened. All the curtains were drawn tight, creating complete darkness, even though it was morning. Most suspicious of all, the cell phones belonging to both brothers and Emma had been turned off around 2:45 a.m. In 15 years of investigating violent crimes, I've learned to trust my instincts, and everything about this scene pointed to an inside job. There was no forced entry, nothing was stolen, and Emma was the only person with access to the house. Her story about sleeping through a violent attack happening just down the hall seemed implausible. The evidence suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the house and the brothers' routines.
The police focused on Emma Collins too quickly and ignored other potential suspects. My investigation revealed that Henry Sanders had been receiving threatening phone calls for weeks before his death. The caller claimed Henry owed money from old gambling debts and threatened violence if he didn't pay. Michael Sanders had become increasingly paranoid, checking door locks multiple times each night and installing additional security cameras. I found evidence that someone had been watching the house, cigarette butts in the bushes, footprints in the garden, and neighbors reported seeing an unfamiliar car parked on the street. The prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and the assumption that Emma must be guilty because she was present. But presence doesn't equal guilt, and reasonable doubt exists for a reason.
I loved those men like they were my own grandfathers. Henry would help me with my son's homework when I brought him along, and Michael taught my daughter how to use his woodworking tools. They were family to me in every way that mattered. I would never, ever hurt them. Yes, I was behind on my rent, but I never asked them for money. They offered to help, but I always declined. I turned off my phone that night like I always did so it wouldn't disturb them with calls from my other clients. I took a sleep aid because I was stressed about my other job, not because I was planning anything sinister. When I found them dead, my world collapsed. I called 911 immediately and tried to help, but it was too late. I have lost everything because of false accusations, but I'll never stop proclaiming my innocence.
The forensic evidence in the Sanders case was frustratingly inconclusive. DNA testing found unknown male DNA on a blood-stained shirt discovered in the laundry room, but it didn't match Emma or anyone in the police database. Fingerprint analysis revealed no signs of forced entry, but also no clear evidence pointing to Emma as the killer. The murder weapon, believed to be a kitchen knife, was never found, despite extensive searches of the house and surrounding area. Most intriguingly, the brothers' security cameras had been disabled around midnight, 3 hours before the estimated time of death. This suggested either technical knowledge or inside information about the system. The medical examiner determined that both brothers had been killed between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., but Emma's cell phone showed no activity during that time period. This case illustrates one of the most fundamental principles of American justice, the concept of reasonable doubt. Emma Collins spent 2.5 months in jail before being released on bail. The prosecution was convinced they had their killer, but the defense had raised enough questions to create doubt in the minds of legal experts. The unknown male DNA, the threatening phone calls, the disabled security cameras, and the lack of a clear motive all worked in Emma's favor. But reasonable doubt doesn't mean innocence. It means the prosecution cannot prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This distinction is crucial to understanding our justice system. Sometimes the most likely suspect isn't the guilty party. Sometimes the evidence isn't as clear as we'd like it to be.
The decision to drop charges against Emma Collins was one of the most difficult of my career. The circumstantial evidence against her was substantial. She was the only person in the house. She had financial problems, and her story had inconsistencies. But circumstantial evidence alone isn't enough for a murder conviction, especially when there are unanswered questions about other potential suspects. The unknown DNA evidence was particularly troubling. We couldn't ignore the threatening phone calls or the disabled security cameras. My job isn't to win cases, it's to ensure justice is served. Taking a weak case to trial could result in an acquittal, which would forever prevent us from prosecuting Emma, even if new evidence emerged. I stand by my decision, even though I understand the community's frustration.
The decision to drop charges against Emma Collins divided Portland like few cases in recent memory. Supporters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs declaring her innocence and calling for a more thorough investigation. Critics organized counter-protests, demanding that the district attorney reconsider his decision. The Sanders brothers' few surviving relatives issued a statement expressing their disappointment with the justice system and their belief that Emma had escaped punishment. Local media coverage was intense, with daily updates on the case and extensive debate about whether the right decision had been made. The case highlighted the challenges faced by prosecutors when dealing with circumstantial evidence and the high burden of proof required for criminal convictions. It also raised questions about how quickly police focus on one suspect while potentially ignoring other leads. Henry and Michael Sanders are buried side by side in Portland's Riverside Cemetery. Their modest headstones bear simple inscriptions: beloved brother and devoted teacher for Henry, beloved brother and faithful worker for Michael. The cemetery groundskeeper reports that someone, identity unknown, leaves fresh flowers on their graves every week. Their former neighbors remember them as quiet, kind men who helped their community in small ways. Henry tutored struggling students for free even after retirement. Michael volunteered at the local food bank and helped elderly neighbors with yard work. They lived simple lives, hurt no one, and deserved to die peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by loved ones. Instead, they died violently, and their killer may never be brought to justice.
The Sanders case remains open, and I review the file every month. We've re-interviewed witnesses, analyzed new evidence, and followed up on dozens of tips from the public. The unknown male DNA has been run through the national database multiple times, but no match has been found. The threatening phone calls have been traced to a prepaid phone purchased with cash, making the caller virtually untraceable. Emma Collins has cooperated with all follow-up investigation and maintains her innocence. She's had to move to a different city due to the notoriety of the case. I believe the answer is still out there. Someone knows what happened that. We'll never close this case until we find the truth. Henry and Michael Sanders deserve justice, and we won't give up until we deliver it.
The Sanders case forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our justice system. Sometimes we arrest the wrong person, sometimes the evidence isn't as clear as we'd like it to be, sometimes the most obvious suspect is innocent, and the real killer escapes justice. But we must remember that protecting the innocent is just as important as convicting the guilty. A system that can imprison people without sufficient proof is a system that protects no one. The burden of proof exists for a reason, to ensure that we don't become the kind of society that convicts people based on suspicion rather than evidence. Emma Collins may be innocent, or she may have gotten away with murder. The truth is, we may never know for certain.
Emma Collins' case demonstrates both the strengths and limitations of our justice system. The system worked in that an innocent person, and I believe Emma is innocent, was not wrongfully convicted based on circumstantial evidence. But the system failed in that the real killers of Henry and Michael Sanders may never be brought to justice. Emma has lost her career, her reputation, and her sense of security. She's had to start over in a new city, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering if people recognize her from the news. The presumption of innocence protected her from wrongful conviction, but it couldn't protect her from the court of public opinion. That's the price we sometimes pay for living in a free society. Justice isn't always neat, but it's better than the alternatives.
In the judgment room, we examine cases that test our faith in justice, challenge our assumptions about guilt and innocence, and force us to confront the limitations of our legal system. The Sanders brothers' case reminds us that justice isn't always neat and tidy, but that doesn't mean our system has failed. Sometimes the burden of proof protects the innocent, even when it frustrates those seeking closure. The truth about Henry and Michael Sanders' deaths may never be known, but the principles that guided their case, presumption of innocence, reasonable doubt, and the requirement for proof beyond question, are the foundations of a free society. Thank you for joining us in the Judgment Room, where only facts matter and the pursuit of justice continues.